Beneath every power station, every subway line, every refinery, there are doors nobody opens. Some are locked, some are welded shut, and a few have no business being there at all. Tonight, 3 people found those doors. Against every instinct, they went through. Welcome to True Terraphiles Official. We like to think that if a place is dangerous, there will be signs, a chain link fence, a warning label, something. But the truth is, a lot of the most terrifying places underground are hidden in plain sight. Tucked behind a piece of machinery or at the end of a maintenance corridor nobody's walked in 40 years, tonight you're going to hear about 3 of them. A night watchman at a decommissioned dam in Norway, a graffiti artist breaking into a sealed subway station in Scotland, and a refinery worker in Texas who found a cellar that shouldn't exist. 3 different countries, 3 different decades, one shared experience. When that final door swung open, something on the other side was already waiting. If you've ever felt the urge to explore somewhere you shouldn't, listen to what happened to them first. Orjan Vik was 63 years old, a retired marine engineer who'd taken a quiet night watchman job at the Simatjern hydroelectric plant. A century-old facility built into a granite gorge 2 hours west of Bergen. The plant had been offline since '94, kept on minimal power just to run the emergency lights and sump pumps. And Orjan's job was simple: walk the perimeter twice a shift, check the pressure gauges, and ignore the fact that the whole place felt like a tomb. One November night, with sleet hammering the steel roof, he was doing his midnight round in the lower turbine hall when he noticed a door he'd never paid attention to before set into the back wall behind a dismantled generator, half hidden by rusted pipework, the paint blistered and peeling. It had a sign in Norwegian that read Vedlight Holstenal, strength 1973. Maintenance tunnel, closed 1973. The padlock had been cut, the hasp hanging loose. Orjan knew he should call it in, but he was curious. And at his age, curiosity was one of the few things that still made him feel alive. He pulled the door open. Beyond it, a raw rock tunnel sloped downward, damp and cold, the floor slick with black mold that squelched under his boots. He'd gone maybe 40 meters when the tunnel opened into a massive concrete spillway chamber. A cathedral of industrial decay, the dry spillway, designed to divert floodwater through the mountain and out into the fjord. It hadn't been used since the plant shut down, and the concrete floor was cracked, pooled with stagnant water that reflected his flashlight in oily rainbows. Orjan walked to the center of the chamber, sweeping his beam across the walls, and that's when he saw the far end. The spillway exit was supposed to be a wide arch opening onto the fjord, but it wasn't open. It'd been bricked shut, sealed with cinder blocks and fresh mortar. The work clean and professional, and utterly impossible for a facility that had been abandoned for 30 years. Orjan stared at the wall. The mortar was still slightly damp, and from behind the bricks, a sound began. Low at first, like wind moaning through a crack, but it built, resolved into something vocal. Something human, a scream, solitary and sustained. A woman's voice stretched to the breaking point and held there, bouncing off the concrete until the entire spillway chamber vibrated with it. Orjan dropped his flashlight. The scream cut out instantly, replaced by a silence so complete his ears rang. Then a voice right behind him, speaking Norwegian with an accent so old and rural he could barely parse the words, "Du pent det, hun kommer nu." You opened it. She's coming now, he spun, nothing there. He didn't retrieve his light, he didn't care. He ran blind up the tunnel, hands scraping rock. Knees slamming into the walls, the darkness so thick he could taste it. He burst back into the turbine hall, slammed the maintenance door, and dragged a rusted tool chest in front of it, his heart hammering so hard he thought he might die right there. He called his supervisor at 3 a.m. and quit. When the day crew arrived, they found the maintenance door exactly as he'd described ajar. Tool chest in front of it, but the tunnel beyond was blocked by a cave-in so complete that no one could have walked 40 meters into it. The spillway chamber didn't exist on any updated schematics. The supervisor later told Origin in a quiet phone call that the plant's original blueprints from 1919 had a hand-drawn addendum taped to the spillway section. A warning that the excavation had pierced a natural cave system used for centuries by local folk as a burial deep, and that during the plant's construction in 1921, 7 workers had vanished while laying the spillway foundation. They were never recovered. The spillway had been sealed in 1973 after a series of night shift workers reported hearing a woman wailing from inside the mountain. Origin still doesn't sleep with the lights off. Siobhan Delaney had been leaving her tag shiver. Big looping silver letters on Glasgow's least accessible surfaces for 6 years. And she'd heard the rumors about Queen Street low level since she was a teenager. A secret subway platform built in the 1890s between Queen Street and Buchanan Street stations. Sealed off in 1977 after a structural event that the city council never explained. The entrance was supposedly behind a maintenance door in the existing Queen Street lower concourse, but Siobhan had checked that door a dozen times and found it welded solid. The real way in, she eventually learned from a retired transport engineer she met in a pub in Partick, was through a disused cable tunnel that ran parallel to the modern tracks and could be accessed from a storm drain grate in the alley behind the old Royal College. She went down on a wet Tuesday in March, alone, with a respirator and a bright LED headlamp and a can of silver paint. The cable tunnel was tight, full of dead wires and rat droppings. And it smelled like creosote and damp brick and something older beneath it, something animal. She followed it 300 meters before the brickwork changed, became formal, Victorian, the curved ceiling of a passenger tunnel. And then she was there standing on the platform of Queen Street, low level. It was preserved like a museum no one had ever opened. The tiling on the walls was dark green and cream, the benches still bolted to the floor. The signage an elaborate Victorian serif, Queen Street low-level trains to Kelvin Bridge and Maryhill. But the thing that stopped Siobhan cold, the thing that made her forget about her tag entirely, was the train. Sitting at the platform, as if waiting. 2 wooden carriages, their varnish blackened with age, the windows opaque with grime. The doors were closed. The headlamp on the front carriage was still burning, a dim orange glow powered by nothing she could see. Siobhan walked to the edge of the platform and peered through the nearest window, wiping away a century of filth with her sleeve. Inside, the carriage was full of passengers, dozens of them, seated upright, dressed in Edwardian clothesmen and high collars and bowler hats, women in long skirts and elaborate hair.
Ow.
None of them moved. None of them breathed. Every single face was turned toward the window, toward her eyes open and fixed, and every single eye was a solid, milky white, like the eyes of deep cave fish. Siobhan staggered backward, her headlamp beam swinging wildly across the platform, and when it passed over the tunnel entrance at the far end, she saw something that the transport engineer hadn't mentioned. A man standing in the darkness of the tunnel mouth. Tall, too tall. His head nearly touched the tunnel ceiling, He was wearing the uniform of a Victorian station master, the brass buttons still faintly gleaming in her light. He was holding up one hand in the universal gesture for stop, and then he spoke, his voice carrying down the platform like a recording played at half speed, each word dragged out, wet, clicking. "The tunnel is closed, madam. There's been a collapse. Please remain on the platform with the others." Chauvin didn't remain. She scrambled back into the cable tunnel, cracked her head on the brick arch, crawled like a panicked animal through the dark until she hit the storm drain grate and burst into the alley. She sat against the wall in the rain for 20 minutes before she could stand. She never tagged the Queen Street low level. 2 months later, she found an archived Glasgow Herald article from November 1903. A train had departed Queen Street low level bound for Maryhill and entered the tunnel. A section of the roof collapsed behind it. The tunnel was sealed at both ends. Rescue crews couldn't reach the train. After 6 weeks, the city council declared the tunnel structurally unsalvageable and left the train where it was, with 41 passengers still on board, their fate officially recorded as unresolved. The platform was sealed in 1977 after a maintenance crew reported hearing voices through the brickwork, asking when the train would be allowed to leave. Reynaldo Ray Castillo had been working maintenance at the Beacon Road refinery outside Nederland, Texas, for 11 years, and he'd crawled into every pipe rack, tank sump, and valve pit on the property. So, when the new safety manager handed him a stack of updated site maps and told him to verify them in the field, Ray paid attention. Everything matched up. Every tank, every pipeline, every containment berm, except one thing. Near the oldest section of the tank farm, behind Tank Fortina, rusted behemoth that hadn't held product since the 90s, the nap showed an unlabeled concrete pad with a steel hatch. Ray had never seen it before. He walked out to Tank 14 on a stifling July afternoon, the air thick with the smell of crude and salt from the Gulf, and found the pad exactly where the map indicated, half obscured by Johnson grass and crawling with fire ants. The hatch was a heavy steel lid, about 4 feet square, set flush into the concrete, and the locking bolts had been sheared off recently, the bare metal still bright. Ray pulled it open. The ladder descended into darkness, the rungs slick with condensation. At the bottom, a concrete room, maybe 20 by 20, empty except for an old wooden desk pushed against the far wall, and behind the desk, a door. A heavy steel door with a wheel lock and a thick rubber gasket, like something you'd see on a submarine. Ree's flashlight found a plaque bolted to the door. Baker Process Solutions Containment Chamber, for authorized personnel only. He'd never heard of Baker Process Solutions. Neither had anyone else at the refinery. He checked his phone, no signal down here, obviously, and figured he'd take a quick look and report back. The wheel lock turned surprisingly easily, the gasket releasing a hiss of air that smelled like formaldehyde and rust and something charred. He pulled the door open and found himself staring into a long corridor lit by a string of bare bulbs that were still burning. Still working? The corridor walls were concrete, the floor covered in cracked linoleum, and every 10 feet, there was another door exactly like the one he'd just opened. Containment Chamber 5, Containment Chamber 6, Containment Chamber 7. Ray walked down the corridor, counting 8 doors on each side, and at the end, a 9th room with a wider entrance and a sign that said Observation. He pushed through. The observation room had a large viewing window looking into a chamber beyond, and the window was smeared on the inside with something dark and flaking. Ray rubbed it clear with his sleeve and shone his light through. The chamber beyond was circular, tiled white, the walls covered in scratch marks, thousands of them, clawed into the tile in long parallel furrows. In the center of the room, facing the window, sat a bed frame with no mattress, just rusted springs, and on the spring sat a man. He was wearing a stained hospital gown, his hair long and matted, his fingers curled into claws. But his eyes were focused, alert, locked onto Ray through the glass. The man smiled, and then he spoke, his voice muffled by the window but perfectly audible. "You're the first one in 42 years? Did they finally remember we're down here?" Ray started to say something, he didn't know what tanned. Then he saw movement in the shadows behind the man. The chamber wasn't empty. There were others. Dozens of them, crowded against the back wall, sitting against the tile, some standing. All of them wearing the same stained gowns. All of them staring at the window with the same alert, hungry focus. The man on the bed tilted his head and said very softly, "Don't worry, we've been patient. Can wait a little longer." Ray backed out of the observation room, turned, and ran. Didn't stop when he hit the ladder. Didn't stop when he slammed the hatch shut. Didn't stop until he was in his truck with the engine screaming across the refinery parking lot. He called the sheriff from a gas station in Port Arthur. But when the deputies searched the pad the next day, the hatch was gone, just an unbroken concrete slab with no seams, no doors, nothing underneath. The refinery's corporate owners denied any knowledge of a cellar or a company called Baker Process Solutions. But 3 months later, Ray found a reference in an old microfiche archive at the Jefferson County Library in 1982. A Houston-based contractor called Baker Process Solutions had been hired by the DOE to conduct long-term isolation studies at several Gulf Coast industrial sites. The contract was terminated in 1983, with all records classified. The facility beneath Tank 14 was never decommissioned. The people inside, if they were ever people, were never retrieved. Ray still works at the refinery, but he won't go near Tank 14. And on the quietest night shifts, he says you can feel something vibrating up through the concrete pad, like a knock, like someone asking to be let out. 3 sealed places. 3 doors that were never meant to be opened. A spillway beneath a Norwegian mountain where 7 men vanished, and something still screams. A subway platform in Glasgow where a train full of passengers never reached its destination and never left. A hidden cellar under a Texas refinery where people were locked away and forgotten, but not gone. Orjan, Shaban, and Ray all made the same choice. They saw a door that was supposed to stay closed, and they opened it anyway. They've lived with the consequences ever since. You've been listening to True Terror Files Official. If these stories got under your skin, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you're here for the next one. I want to hear your stories too. Have you ever found a door or a hatch or a hole in the ground that felt like it wasn't meant for you? Did you go in? Tell me in the comments. Till next time, remember, the things that get sealed away underground don't always stay that way. Sometimes they're not alone.